The old Victorian mansion loomed at the end of a winding road, tall and foreboding with its creaking iron gate and ivy-covered walls. The Whitaker family had seen potential in the house's crumbling grandeur, dreaming of restoring it to its former beauty. As soon as they stepped inside, the house felt like it was holding its breath, as if anticipating their arrival. The first few nights went by without a hitch. They laughed over creaky floorboards, loose doorknobs, and shared ghost stories around the fireplace. But on the fourth night, as the clock struck midnight, the house came alive with an unsettling sound. It was a whisper, soft and almost indistinct, but unmistakable. It slid through the air, curling around corners, slipping beneath doors and finding its way into their rooms. A single phrase, hushed and barely audible, reached all their ears at once. "Come closer." The Whitakers were a practical family, and though unnerved, they brushed it off. Their eldest daughter, Emma, joked that maybe the house was eager for company. But every night, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent, and more specific. "You don't know what you found. We've been waiting." As they continued their renovations, they started discovering strange remnants of the past. A crumbling leather-bound journal hidden in a hollow wall, covered in strange symbols and faded names. A child's dusty doll tucked beneath the floorboards, its glass eyes staring vacantly. And, in the attic, a door painted black, its handle cold as ice and immovable as stone. One night, as the whispers grew louder, each family member found themselves drawn into the same room, a small library on the second floor with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large, cracked mirror. As the clock struck midnight, the room filled with whispers louder than they'd ever heard before, swirling like an invisible storm, pulling them deeper into a trance. Then, the whispers shifted, speaking directly to each of them, sharing secrets no one else could know. A mistake Robert Whitaker, the father, had made in his youth, something he had buried deep. A betrayal from Elizabeth, the mother, that only the walls seemed to know. And secrets for Emma and her younger brother Will, things they'd never told a soul. Shaken, they left the room, but a chilling realization was taking hold. These were the memories of someone watching them. The whispers weren't warnings. They were intimate, luring, inviting. The family tried to shake off the haunting feeling, but each night, the voices called them back. They spoke in the voices of children, then adults, sometimes anguished, sometimes joyful, as if the spirits were reliving pieces of their lives. They told tales of lavish parties, of love and laughter that had once filled the house, until they reached the final, haunting tale, a Halloween night when the last family disappeared. The whispers grew frantic as they recounted the night, echoing through the halls, as if the walls were screaming their memories. Emma, the oldest, pieced it together. The previous family had been celebrating Halloween, just as they were. It had started as whispers for them, too, an invitation to join the house until they had all disappeared. That night, as midnight approached, the Whitakers found themselves irresistibly drawn to the black door in the attic. It opened as if waiting for them, the handle warm this time, beckoning. Inside, a candlelit room stretched before them, with a single, elegant dinner table set for 4. Each place was marked with their names, written in fine cursive on old-fashioned parchment. The whispers hushed as they entered, and instead of voices, there was now a soft, spectral presence. Shapes flickered in and out, figures in vintage clothing who seemed to fade as soon as they were noticed. The Whitakers sat, entranced, watching the figures grow clearer, until they saw the last family, seated exactly as they were. The figures turned, smiling, reaching out across the table to them, but there was something empty in their eyes, a hollow, endless hunger. A shiver ran down Elizabeth's spine, and she tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't move. Robert reached for her hand, but it felt heavy, like lead. Emma and Will looked at each other, terror dawning in their eyes as they tried to push away from the table, but an invisible force kept them in place. And then the whispers returned, only now they were inside their heads. "You're home now," they cooed, soothing, relentless. "Forever." The next morning, the house stood silent. All signs of the Whitakers were gone. Their belongings remained, scattered and untouched, as though they had simply vanished. The town whispered about the disappearance, adding it to the house's growing legend. And eventually, another family came to see its beauty and potential. And the house waited. Its walls held their breath once again, waiting to whisper its secrets anew. Years passed, and the mansion stood silent once more, the dust settling into untouched corners, the walls holding their breath. The town's residents whispered stories about the house on the hill, claiming they'd seen lights flicker in the attic, shadows moving in empty rooms, and the faintest sounds of voices late at night. No one dared to go near it. But one Halloween, a young historian named Caroline came to town, drawn by the rumors. Unlike the others before her, she wasn't looking for a home to restore. She was looking for answers. Carolyn had spent years researching mysterious disappearances tied to the mansion and was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend of the Whispering House. Late one evening, armed with only a flashlight, she stepped through the mansion's towering front doors. The house seemed to welcome her, a subtle creak echoing as the door closed behind her. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation, as if it recognized her presence, recognized her purpose. She began exploring, her flashlight casting eerie shadows along the faded wallpaper and cracked mirrors. Midnight struck, and right on cue, the whispers began, winding through the walls, calling her name. "Caroline!" The whispers were more intense than she'd expected, but instead of fear, she felt a strange pull, a connection. She moved toward the attic, where she knew the heart of the house lay. The black door was already open, candlelight flickering inside as if it had been waiting for her. As Caroline entered, she saw the table set, just as the stories had described. But this time, something was different. Around the table sat faint apparitions, shimmering figures with hollow eyes and mournful expressions. She recognized them from old photos she'd seen in her research, the Whitakers, the Mitchells, and other families before them, each one trapped in the same eternal cycle. With a tremor of realization, she understood that the house was a prison, binding souls within its walls, feeding on them to sustain itself. But the house didn't just want to trap her. It wanted her to join them, to sit at that table, and to bind her life to its dark legacy. But Caroline was prepared. She'd come with something the others hadn't. A small, ancient key she'd found buried in an old town record, an artifact said to hold the power to break curses. She pulled the key from her pocket, clutching it tightly as the whispers grew frantic, pleading, desperate. "No. Stay. Join us." The figures around the table reached out to her, their hollow eyes filling with an aching sadness, a longing to be free. Caroline held up the key and spoke the word she'd memorized, an incantation of release. For the first time, the whispers screamed, a piercing wail that echoed through the house, shaking the walls as if the very foundation were crumbling. One by one, the figures began to dissolve, their expressions shifting from anguish to peace. The Whitakers smiled faintly before vanishing, followed by the Mitchells and then the others. Caroline felt a wave of warmth and relief as the spirits found release, their souls finally free of the mansion's grasp. And then, as the last whisper faded into silence, the house itself seemed to exhale, a final, defeated breath. The candles flickered out, the walls creaked, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the mansion lifted, leaving it hollow, empty. Caroline left the Whispering House just as dawn broke over the hill. She glanced back once, seeing the mansion in the soft morning light, now an ordinary, crumbling relic with nothing left to hide. Its power was broken, its whispers silenced. She knew the town would still tell stories about the house on the hill, but now, those stories would end. The house would never whisper again. As the sun set low in the sky, Max and Sarah were deep into the third day of their road trip. winding through remote backcountry roads with barely another car in sight. They'd left the city to escape the stress of daily life, craving something new and unknown. But the last few hours had felt endless as they wound through forest after forest, isolated in a realm that felt more and more removed from civilization. Just as they were beginning to lose hope of finding a place to sleep, Sarah spotted a sign. The isolated hotel, vacancy. The hotel was impressive but unsettling, towering darkly against the twilight sky. It looked like a place untouched by time, an old-world relic in the middle of nowhere. As they pulled up, they noticed the sign had a second line below the vacancy. Guests must check in before dark. Max chuckled nervously as he checked his watch. They were just on time. Inside, they were greeted by a tall, serious man who introduced himself simply as the manager. He handed them an old-fashioned key with a brass room number. As they began to turn away, he paused, leaning forward with a serious expression. "Do not open your window after dark," he said, his voice almost a whisper, as though he feared something might overhear him. Max laughed it off, but Sarah felt a chill. The man's intense eyes didn't waver until they nodded in understanding. As they made their way to their room, they noticed how the whole hotel felt a bit too quiet. Their footsteps echoed as if the place was holding its breath. They entered their room, a cozy but outdated suite with heavy drapes and a large window overlooking the dense woods beyond. The air felt stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. As they settled in, Max cracked open the window to let in some fresh air. They could see the faint light of the moon, casting pale beams across the trees below. But in their tired state, they forgot the warning, left the window ajar, and went to sleep. Hours later, Sarah stirred in bed. A strange feeling pulled her from sleep, an itch, a sense that something wasn't right. She glanced at the window and froze. There, just beyond the glass, something was staring at her. The shape was barely visible, half cloaked in shadow, but its outline seemed almost wrong. It was too still, yet its presence was overwhelming, filling the room with a sense of something ancient and predatory. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized, whatever it was, it knew they were there. She reached for Max, trying to wake him as quietly as possible. He stirred, grumbling, until he noticed her wide eyes and followed her gaze to the window. When he saw it, his face went pale. Together, they moved slowly, trying not to make a sound. But then, click, the window shifted open another inch. It was as if the thing had been waiting for an invitation. Shadows pooled around the frame as a soft rustling sound began, something shifting just beyond their sight. Then, slowly, something began to crawl into the room, a shape that defied the form of any creature they knew. It was long, twisted, almost like shadows given life, moving with unnatural silence toward them. Panicked, Max grabbed the lamp and turned it on, casting a pool of light into the room. The creature recoiled, retreating toward the window, but it didn't leave. It lingered just beyond the light's reach, watching, waiting. The night felt endless as they sat, clutching each other, too afraid to move. Every time they glanced toward the window, they saw it there, motionless, waiting, as if studying them. They tried to wait for dawn, but fatigue weighed on their eyelids, and eventually, despite their fear, they drifted into a shallow, haunted sleep. When morning finally came, they awoke to bright light streaming through the window. The eerie calm of the room felt almost like a relief. They quickly packed their things, avoiding the window as they threw on their coats and rushed down the hallway. The manager was waiting for them, silent, as though he'd known what had happened. Without a word, he took the key from them and nodded, a slight, almost pitying look in his eyes. They left without looking back, their hearts still pounding, feeling the weight of something unseen still watching. As they drove away, silence hung heavy between them. Though they'd escaped the hotel, they both felt changed, marked by whatever had visited them. They tried to push it from their minds, but as they drove further, a sinking feeling crept back into their thoughts. Even miles away, they could still feel it, a sense that somewhere, just beyond the trees, something was still watching and waiting.